Hello, this is my consumer presentation for FCS 302. My name is Samantha Portillo, and I am going to be going over consumer credit and debt issues here in America. What is consumer credit? Consumer credit is a debt used when purchases of goods or services are made. It is also known as consumer debt. A common used form of consumer credit is credit cards, and it's classified as a revolving credit or an installment credit as well. What is consumer debt? Consumer debt is extremely similar to consumer credit. The difference is that consumer debt is a debt owed once the purchase is made of goods or services. It can be used for consumption but not investment. It it deals with the amount owed by a consumer, and the common used forms, just like consumer credit, is the credit card debts and also a payday loan. What is the consumer leverage ratio, also known as CLR? The consumer leverage ratio measures the amount of debt the average consumer holds. It is advised that the consumer leverage ratio be no more than 20% of one's take home pay. And the way that someone can find out what their percentage is by calculating the total household debt and dividing it by the disposable personal income. Once that is figured out, that'll give the percentage of the consumer leverage ratio. And on a normal day-to-day basis, it should be no more or no higher than 20%. Some advantages of consumer credits is that the consumers can purchase goods and services and pay for them later. So if they get a credit card, they can go to the store, make payments, and they won't have to worry about paying off that card until the month later once the minimum amount is due. The purchases can be of items that can be made when funds are low. So if a consumer doesn't have as much funds in their debit account or their savings account, they can use their credit card temporarily and pay off any necessary bills. And then once they accumulate the money needed to pay for their monthly finances, they could pay off their credit cards month to month, and they can use it for backups, such as the one monthly payment. So once they pay for all of the goods and needs that they want, they can later worry about how they're going to pay it off. Some of the disadvantages of consumer credit. The first one, of course, is cost, because the credit is not always going to have the same APR for each credit card. Each credit card could hold a 4% APR, a 26% APR. It all depends on the consumer's what they qualify for. So if they have a higher APR, their payments will reflect on it. And if they have a low APR, then it'll be easier for them to pay off their credit. If they don't pay off their credit in time, they could have a potential outcome of legal problems occurring. So if they signed on for something stating that they were going to pay monthly and a certain amount monthly and they don't hold up to their end, then situations could occur to where it's a disadvantage for them and it could hurt their credit score. Failure to pay off credit balance in parts. So If they do not pay off their credit card, if they do not keep up their monthly payments, then their credit score will be damaged. And this doesn't just go for credit cards, it goes for personal loans, car loans, mortgage loans. Um, any type of late payment will be reflected on one's credit score. And if it hits them bad enough, it could affect them to the point where they couldn't get another loan, another credit card, all because of one mistake that they did in the past. Um, their original terms and conditions could change if they fail to pay off or make payments for their credit card, just depending on what their contract states once they originally got the credit card to begin with. And then, of course, there's late fees and penalties that'll always be applied. Um, the late fees is not a part of the APR. The late fees is an additional payment that would be added on after the fact of the APR being added. So if someone has $100 credit card and they maxed it out, their APR is 20%, their payments going to be they're going to be added on $20 from that 100, and then with another late fee they could be added on whatever that late fee is. So it could be another 20, it could be 10. So instead of just owing the $100 that they had for the credit card, it's going to end up being 150 after the APR and late fees are applied. A debt management plan is a way to repay money owed from credit cards, loans, any financial issues. But with a debt management plan, that plan does not help everyone who is in debt. It only helps those who qualify for the plan. So the way it works is that a consumer agrees to a mutual payment plan with who they owe money with, and also with the party that they originally owe. So it's going to be three parties: the consumer, the company, the original company owed, and then a credit counselor. So the consumer is going to be paying the credit counselor not only a payment plan, but also for the services that the credit counselor is providing them. So they're all going to meet up and they're going to agree to a mutual monthly payment and a mutual overall payment. And once that is made, it may or may not lower the interest rate. It just depends on what kind of payment plan is made and what contract they drew up. After that, a monthly deposit is going to be made from the consumer to the credit counselor, depending on what their ending balance was. And this is going to be made for whatever term of agreement they have agreed on. So if they agreed to 36 months, then for 36 months they're going to pay a certain amount, and that amount is going to go about 90% will go to the original company owed, and about 10 will go to the consumer, the credit counselor. So once that term passes, the credit counselor will pay off all the debt owed until the debt is 100% paid off and everyone is satisfied. What is a predatory lending? A predatory lending is basically it targets groups with less access and understanding forms of financing. They try to take advantage of those who aren't completely in the know of how credit works and how to pay off credit and how to establish credit. They can charge unreasonably high interest rates. Once again, they're just taking advantage. They're trying to better their company instead of helping the consumer who needs help. Um, and the FDIC, they define a predatory lending as imposing unfair and abusive abusive loan terms on borrowers. So it's basically the worst way to get help on paying off any debt, loans, credit cards, or anything uh, to that extent. When any type of loan needs to get paid off um, or hasn't gotten paid off, there's going to be debt collectors that are going to be calling these consumers who owe the money. Um, but legally, these debt collectors have guidelines that they have to follow 100%. And if they don't, that technically means that they are breaking the law because these are laws that were put federally for them to follow. That way, a consumer doesn't feel like they're being um, basically harassed. So, some of these guidelines that they have to follow is that they could only call from 8 in the morning to 9 p.m., depending on whatever time zone they're in. Um, they cannot tell anyone about their consumer's debt. That is just um, a debt collector and a consumer's, that's just their private conversations. No one else can know about them. But what they can do is that they could call around asking for the consumer's address, home number, or workplace address or home number. That way they can get a hold of the consumer debt, but they can't tell them exactly what it's for. All they can tell them is that they need to contact them. And if this said person decides to give them the contact information, then they legally can. They can't harass people. Um, Basically, by harassment, it doesn't mean calling every day. That is not a type of harassment. That is technically their job. They have to call every day to try to settle out a payment, but they cannot threaten or they cannot um, speak in a tone that shows hostility. They have to be open and willing to listen and talk through and everything, but they can't threaten to hurt anyone. And on top of that, they can't lie. They can't say things that aren't true just to get more information or just to get more money out of the consumer. What is a validation notice? A validation notice is basically um, a written notice that debt collectors send to people who owe the debt. So it's kind of like the written notice of a phone call. Um, in this day and age, those aren't really given out as much as they used to be. But once a debt goes from one bank to another or from one collector to another, then those notices will be sent just to let the consumers know that their debt is transferring from different um, owners, basically. The notice has to include the amount owed, who the money is owed to. So if a bank does change, then they have to state that your your debt from this bank has now been transferred to this bank. So from there, that way the consumer knows who's handling their debt. And then they need to know, or it needs to state what needs to be done if that person who got a letter had already paid off the debt and doesn't owe anymore. Um, these three things are the main things that need to be on a, a validation notice just to make it professional for the consumer to know about their debt. After receiving calls from debt collectors, it could get frustrating and overwhelming. So, the way to stop debt collectors from calling is the first thing to do is send a letter asking for the debt collector to stop calling. Um, It's just a simple letter stating that you understand that you owe, but that you do not want to receive any phone calls. And then from there, they would probably send you the validation notices instead of any type of phone calls. If it doesn't work from there, you could file a complaint. Um, the one thing though is that after you send a letter, that should stop it legally. If it doesn't, then they are again breaking the law by sending or by continuing to call after you had asked. So it's part of an harassment once you have asked to stop being called. Um, and the Federal Trade Commission, they help when it comes to these debt collectors from continuously calling. So once a letter doesn't work and you filed a complaint, then you could call the Federal Trade Commission and report those bad debt collectors. And the number is stated on the slide. It's 1-877-382-4357. So once that call is made, they'll take all your information down, and then they'll call that debt collector and tell them that so and so has gotten a hold stating that they don't want to receive any more phone calls, but they keep receiving phone calls. So from there, it should be put at a stop. The one thing on every consumer's mind is how to pay off their debt once they realize how much they have stacked up on debt. The first thing to do is to make a budget. By making a budget, it helps the consumer realize how much their debt to income ratio really is. And from there, they can start figuring out what costs need to be cut. So, what they should first do is write down their monthly income. And then on a column right next door, figure out what their monthly spendings normally are, including bills and personal expenses. Um, and then from there, fully analyze what their spendings are and see from there where they could start saving money. So if their bills are, if they make $2,000 a month and their bills are about 1,200, so that means they have 800 left over, but they use about 600 just on basic wants and needs. They could cut that, and that way they could save up at least those 600 for uh, setting it aside to pay off the debt owed. Once that is done, they can call the companies that they owe, and they can go over with them stating why they haven't made a payment or why their payments were so low. Um, that way, the consumer and the company both see eye to eye as to where the problem started. And then from there, they can try to meet a goal for lower payments. But that doesn't mean that the APR, the interest, will go down. It's just stating that what the company is asking for will be lower than what they were originally asking for. And then from there, once they try to see eye to eye, the consumer can try to get credit counseling. That way, the counselor can basically more or less just try to separate their spendings, um, and they'll worry about the financial debt that they owe while the consumer can go on trying to pay off all of their monthly finances. The NFCC, that also known as the National Foundation for Credit Counseling, um, it's a very well known uh, counseling foundation. It was founded in 1951. They advise more than 1 million consumers a year, and that's altogether in person, online, and over the phone. Um, the nation's They are the nation's largest and longest serving nonprofit financial counseling organization. Um, and they basically just go over and they provide financial reviews and they educate the consumers. That way, if consumers really want to know what it is that they owe, why is it that they owe that much, they go step by step in trying to explain every debt and loan owed. And from there, they'll try to help them out and tell them what steps they need to take after. That way, they could start paying everything off. The NFCC advice that they give for credit and debt um, is they have a handful of topics that they offer their members as far as advice and services go. Some of the examples that they offer service on is credit and debt counseling to begin with, how to minimize credit, minimize debt, but maximize their credit scores. They help with bankruptcy counseling, housing counseling, reverse mortgage counseling, student loan debt counseling, debt management plans, credit report reviews, and then they have financial tools and education for all of the above. Um, that way, a consumer knows where to start and where to finish when it comes to trying to figure out everything that is needed to pay off their credit. This is my reference page of the websites that I got all of my information in. Once again, my name is Samantha Portillo, and my topic was on the credit and debt consumer issues. Thank you.